This is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this next video lesson. We're going to talk about subs in the Visual Basic language. A sub basically is a chunk of code that does something. We call upon it to do a particular task. Now, in Visual Basic, a sub is something that we call and it doesn't return some sort of an answer or parameter. We call it, it does its job, and that's it. So it's very much like you and I playing Frisbee. I throw a Frisbee to you, and you don't throw it back. You keep it. Or I throw a Frisbee to a dog, the dog catches it and runs away. That's what a sub is. A sub is something we call upon to do, like this is a sub called calculate square root. Here's another sub called display even numbers. Now, we can send it parameters, like in this case, we don't have any parameters inside of it. In this case, we do have a parameter. We're sending this thing a value, specifically an integer, called squared parameter. All right, so this would be as if I throw you a Frisbee, and on that Frisbee, there's the number 10. And I want you to do something with that 10, but you're not going to return the result to me. You're just going to do something. That's basically what subs do. And that's different than functions, which we call just like a sub, except we would type the word function here. And we would create a function name. We could give it parameters, or maybe it doesn't have any parameters. But for sure, functions return something back to us. So that would be like me throwing you a Frisbee. I put the number 10 on that Frisbee. You take that 10, you add a 0 to it. You throw me back the Frisbee, and I realize, oh, you must be the squared function, where you take a number, you square it, you send it back to me. In this case, subs do not return values. So the first thing to note is this. When I double click on a button, right? So let's say that I go over here and I double click on a button. That takes me to the code area, of course. And in this case, that would take me to the btn submit click event. And I would type my code here. Notice what I did. I pressed enter a couple of times, and then I typed the word sub. So we're still inside the class. In other words, this would be wrong. Watch this. I'm going to create an error. Enter, enter. That would be a disaster for me to create code right here. I'm not doing that. These subs, so let me minimize this one. Let me minimize this one. This sub is inside of this class, and so is this sub. Okay, so that's the first thing to note. Whenever you're creating subs, you're going to create them after the end sub of your btn click event, or in other words, inside of the class. All right, so first of all, you type the word sub. So let me just go ahead and do that so you can get an example of this. So let me say that I create a sub, enter. I'm going to call this one erase me, parentheses. And I'll just leave it like that, and I'll hit spacebar over here. All right, so I've just created a sub called erase me. Now, when I call erase me, any code that I type where the cursor is blinking will be executed. And then, once it's finished executing that code, it jumps back to wherever it was called. So for example, if I said, let's call erase me right here. All right, so first we would get the user input, we would put that, we get that from the text box, we would put that into some variables, and then it would call erase me. So we jump from here to here, we execute any code that's over here, and then we go back and execute the next statement. So what this thing does is it jumps to wherever the code is that is going to be executed, which in this case is over here, and then it comes back. All right, now another thing to note that in here, inside the parentheses, you'll notice that these parens are empty. What that implies is that you don't need any arguments. You don't need any parameters to do your job. So if I don't send anything to you, then you must be able to do your own job. For example, maybe you want to declare a variable called, my number, say for example. And we'll set it equal to 10. Okay, so dimp my num as integer, say for example. We'll set it equal to 10. And that's all you want to do, and maybe we want to display that, to some label, say for example. So lbl result.text is going to be convert.toString, whatever my num is, say for example. Now this is all just junk code. I'm just trying to illustrate that I didn't have to get a parameter from you in order to be able to do my job. All right, now I could also create a sub that does have parameters. For example, let's say that I put over here let's say my num parameter as integer. So we'll say integer. Oops, sorry. Integer. And then what you'll notice is that This parameter here is being sent as an integer, and I can use this. So let's say over here that I do something like this. I'll say my number is going to be my num parameter, like this. And now I can use that. In this case, let's say that I want to take my number and I want to add 10 to it, say for example. So now when I display the results onto this label, it's going to be whatever I sent to this particular sub. I've just modified it. I've placed it into a variable called mynum, and then it's going to display that result onto the label. So what we call these guys over here, we call them parameters. Now, there are several ways that I can use parameters. For example, let me hit the space bar and I'll type in byval. What this term means is that I am sending a copy and a paste of this value to you. Now, that would be as if, let's say that we talk about our Frisbee illustration. So we're at the park. I take a Frisbee and I write the number 10 on that Frisbee. Now let me clone that Frisbee. I will throw you a clone of that Frisbee and I keep the original. That's what byval does. Byval says, I have just received a copy, but I don't have the original of the value that you sent to me. So therefore, if I change this, okay, so let me mess around with this code over here. Let me say that my num is going to be whatever the old value of my num parameter is plus 10, say for example, right? And I'm going to display the result of that onto the label. All right, so I take the value that you gave to me. You've just sent me a copy of it. That's how I want you to think of this term byval. All right, I take that, I add 10 to it, and now my num par has changed, but this hasn't changed the original value that was sent to me. So for example, if I said erase me, and I'm going to send to you this number over here. Okay, so users squared num, say for example. Okay, and let's say that this is the number 10. Okay, so I sent you the number 10. Over here, this and this are both 10. I'm sending this as a copy. So here you are, you've just received it as a copy. If I change the copy, does that change over here? No. Users squared num is still going to be 10. Because remember, I sent a clone of the Frisbee to you. So you have the clone, I have the original. So if I can modify the clone as much as I want, I have no effect on the original. And by the way, you know, in terms of like, okay, here inside of this btn click submit event, here I'm calling it squares, user squared number. Let's say that's just the number 10. And so I'm sending you basically the number 10, but here I'm calling it my num parameter. Well, this is equivalent to the following analogy. When I go home, my son says, hey, daddy, and then my wife hopefully says, hi, honey. And so they're both referring to the same person. So this could be, hi, daddy. This could be, hi, honey. They're both referring to the same person, but in this context, just make sure that you understand that since this is byval, that you are receiving a copy of a value and not the original. Now that's different than if I typed in by ref. If I type in by ref, that means you are sending the original. So whatever this value is, I send it over here. Now both of these are referring to that same value. Let's say the number 10. Okay, look at this. I've just changed the number, my parameter. I've added 10 to it. So now my parameter, my num parameter has now been increased by 10. Since I changed it here, and because I sent you the original, that means this value would also change as well. So if this is 10, I send you 10. 10 plus 10, that's 20. My num parameter is 20, but since I sent you the original, that means that user squared num is now also 20. So that's the difference between this by ref and by val. Think of it as just either sending the original or sending a copy. Okay, and then in terms of subs, you type in the word sub. What is the name of that sub? Are you going to send me parameters? By the way, I could send multiple parameters, like I could say comma by val, say for example. Send me, let me see, is there anything else that I can send? Let's say, for example, that I'm going to create a variable called temp as integer, right? And so over here, I would just call it temp parameter. That's typically what I do. If you're sending me temp, I'll call it temp parameter. I could have called this user squared num. I could have called it user squared num parameter, but that's okay. And over here, I'm just going to say as integer. All right, so if you're going to send multiple parameters, just separate them with a comma, and I could send as many as I want, and then I can use them. So it's kind of like me saying to my son, hey, I want you to go change the tire on my car. So what am I going to have to give my son? I'm going to have to give him the tools necessary to be able to remove the lug nuts, probably have to give him some sort of a tool to be able to remove the hubcap. I'm going to have to give him some wrenches and pliers and screwdrivers to do the job that he needs to do. All right, so that's what these guys are. You could think of them as the necessary things that this sub needs in order for it to do its job. All right, well, let me get rid of this guy now, and let me show you what the purpose is of this particular program. So I'll erase this code, and let's go back over here to the forms. And what we're going to do is we're going to display the even numbers, and we're also going to display the square root. So we ask the user to enter a whole number, and then we're going to calculate the square root of another particular number. We're going to click submit, then we're going to place the answers down here. So let me just run the code so you can get an idea of what it looks like right off the bat. All right, so I run the code, and let's say enter a whole number. Okay, so I'll enter 4, say, for example. Calculate the square root of, okay, let's say that I want the square root of 36, say, for example. So I click submit. So what this thing does is it displays even numbers starting from 0, 0, 2, 4, 6, specifically 4 even numbers, as you can see here. And it also calculates the square root of 36, which you can see over here is 6. Okay. Now, this function, this particular program isn't really useful, but it's just going to illustrate a point about how to use subs. All right, so now let's go back over here to the code so I can explain how this works out. Now, the first thing that I want to do is to obtain the user's input. Well, in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this variable as a global. Now, notice that this declaration is outside of any function. So, for example, if I were to put it in here, we would say that this variable is local. It's local to this btn submit click event or sub. Now, I don't want that in this case. I want to make this thing global. So if it's outside of any sub or function, then we call this global. Another word is modular. In other words, this would be like skywriting on the wall. Skywriting on the sky, rather. All of us can look up and we can all see the skywriting. Now, if I wrote a message with a marker on my ceiling, only the people inside of my home would be able to see that message in my ceiling because that message is local. But if I had airplanes write something on the sky, then everyone would be able to see it. That's what global is like, and that's my former example is what local is like. Okay, so I'm going to create this global variable. Now, in general, you probably want to be careful about creating global variables. It's not bad, but it's also not encouraged because maybe you don't have the kind of control, which you'll learn in future programming classes. You don't have the kind of control that you would like local variables. Global variables, anyone can change them. Again, they're not bad. Some of your bosses will discourage them, but it's important for me to be able to illustrate that you can use global variables and, in fact, how to use them. All right. Now, in our btn submit click event, you'll notice that I have created a variable. It's specifically an integer, and it's called user's squared number. So what I've got to do is I've got to get the user number from this text box to show me or to indicate to me how many even numbers that I'm going to draw. And then I'm also going to get the text from this text box to determine what the square root is of a particular number based on the user. I typed in 36 over here, so the square root would be 6. All right, so let's say, for example, when I typed in 4, 4 would go over here. When I typed in 36, 36 would go into here. All right, now in the calculation section, I'm going to call 2 subs. One of the subs is called display even numbers. So let's go from here. When I call this, it jumps down over here to this sub, and then it's going to perform this code. All right, so the name of this subroutine or sub is display even numbers, as you can see over here. Notice the open and close parentheses, as you can see over here, and that means that this sub has no arguments, or in other words, it has no parameters. It doesn't require anything in order for it to do its job. So if that's the case, what do I need to do? Well, I'm going to create 3 variables, counter, even number, and also output as a string. I'm going to set the counter to 0 and set even number to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a repetition structure to draw however many numbers the user wants. Well, as you can see over here, I have version 1 and I have version 2 of how to do this. So in this case, we're using the LBL result label to display the results directly onto the label. And then in this scenario, I'm using an output variable that I created over here, displaying all the results of the output, and then I can display the results of the output variable to the text property of this given label. So either one of these works. I'm just showing you, two different approaches so that you can do the job. And in essence, what we're doing is this. Whatever the output is, which at first you can see it's nothing, we are going to concatenate that with blank, and then whatever the even number is, which of course is 0 in terms of the first even number. I'm going to increment the counter. I'm going to increment the even number by 2. So even number goes from 0 to 2, and then 2 to 4, and then 4 to 6, and so forth and so on. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 for every single repetition of this while statement. We keep on doing this as long as the counter is less than the user number. So remember, counter starts off at 0. User number is 4. So we'll have 0, 1, 2, 3. 3 is still less than 4. 4 will not repeat again through this loop because 4 is not less than 4. So in other words, we are going to loop through this 4 times, starting with 0. And then once we're finished, we take that output variable, which is growing. At first, output is going to look like this. Output is going to have it looks like there's a space here, so we'll put a space, and then there's going to be the even number, which is 0. Then the next time we loop through this, there's going to be a space, and then the even number, which is 2. Then we're going to loop through this again. There's going to be a space. The even number is now 4. And if the user number is 4, it'll go one more time. We'll display a space, and the even number, which is 6. Now, the next counter would be 4. 4 is not less than user number, which is 4. So then we would jump out of the while statement. We would then execute this statement, which takes the output, it's going to assign it to the text property of the label. That's what the result would be. Again, if the user number were 4. Okay? So that's how this works. Then we reach end sub. We go back to the calling function, which is right over here. So we call this sub. Then we execute the next statement, which is this guy. Now, calculate square root, as you can see, receives a parameter. Let's say that I entered the number 36 into the text box. So this would be 36. We are going to send 36 to calculate square root sub because that's what it needs to do its job. So I send the 36, pretend that there's an arrow that's pointing right here because I've just thrown you a frisbee. And now this frisbee, let's say that I put over here by val. Okay, so this thing is being transferred to you by value. In other words, I am sending you a copy. If you don't see anything like previously, then the default is by val. So if it was just like this, the default is by val. But in this case, we really do want to put something over here like by val to indicate how I am giving you the data. Well, this tells me you've given me a copy, so you have the original. Okay? So if this was 36, draw an arrow over here, 36, a copy of that 36 has been placed over here. So squared parameter, which is what I'm calling the number that you gave to me, is 36 in this particular example. Well, what am I doing? It looks like I'm taking 36. I'm going to call the math square root function, called square root, and sqrt that is. 36 square root, that's 6. 6, I'm going to change that to a string variable by converting it, and then I'm going to place that into the text parameter of the label. So what this sub does is you give it an integer, and it'll determine what the square root is, and then it'll place it into the text property of a given label. So once this sub has finished, then we go back over here. What is after this? Well, it looks like there's nothing after this, so the program ends. All right, so once again, I'm going to run the program so you can see what that looks like. And so if I put over here 3, and if I put over here 81, run the program, I want 3 even numbers. The square root of 81 is 9. All right, let me just stop the program here so that we can investigate what this looks like when I debug. So let me go ahead and put that number 3 again, and I'll put 49, say, for example. Click Submit. Okay, now we've stopped the program. That's what that yellow arrow means. We've stopped the program here at Display Even Numbers. Now, you should see these debug buttons over here. If you don't, if you go to this gray, dark gray over here and right-click, then you want to make sure that you select, I think it's debug. Let me just double check. So let me select debug. Yep, that's it. So let me right-click, and I'm going to click on debug. These are the tools that you want. Now, specifically these 3. This one says step into, step over, step out. Well, I want to step into this sub. So I'm going to click over here and notice what happened. We jumped into the sub. Now that we are in the sub, I can go ahead and click this guy over here, which is step over, and that just simply takes me step by step through each of these different items. So as you can see here, I'm going to keep on going through these items step by step to see what the values look like. I can either hover over any one of these variables to see what they look like, or I can use the Autos panel to display what the values are. And to get this window, what you would do is you would go into Debug, Windows, and then you can see over here, here's Autos, here's Locals, here's Immediate. Probably one of these two are the ones that you're going to use. Uh-oh, my battery's low, so let me hook up my power supply really fast. All right, power supply is connected, we're okay. Okay, so that's how this works out, this Autos panel. So why don't I do this just so that you can see how I do it. Let me remove the Autos, let me remove the Locals, I'm going to remove this Threads, Modules, Watch. Okay, I have nothing over here, right? Watch this. So remember, this only happens when you're in debug mode. See, I'm debugging. I'm stopping the code and debugging. If you're not in this debug mode, this won't work. So I go to Debug, and then let's say that I want the Autos panel. So I'll go to Windows, and I'll look for the Autos panel, which is right here. Okay, so there it is. It displays this panel, which is telling me that output looks like this, and even number looks like this. So let me see if I can make this thing just a little bit bigger here. So a little bit bigger over here. Okay, so even number currently is 4. Output is currently the space 0 space 2. All right, and in other words, we're freezing time. That's what it looks like at this point. Let me go ahead and hit step over, and I can just go through this while statement until it's finished. Then we're going to take the output, which is this, and send it to the text property. All right, so then I'll do that. We'll say step over, step over. Okay, and now look what happens. I step over, and now that we've completed this sub, we are now about to complete this sub. So I want to see what that looks like. So I can say step in. So I'll step in, and now we've stepped into this parameter. This user squared number, I think I entered 49, and so over here you see the number 49 has been sent. Now that's by val, which means that I am sending a copy of that particular value. All right, so now the next thing I'm about to execute is to take that 49, determine the square root, convert that to a string, and put that into the text property of LBL square root. Okay, so I don't want to keep on stepping now. I'm done, so I'm going to click continue and then see what the output of the program is, and here it is. Let me stop the program. I'm going to remove that break because the next time I execute this program, I don't want it to break, and that's it. All right, so that is an introduction to how subs work. Just to recap, subs do not return anything. Subs are called upon, they do a particular job, and that's it. Now, if you want something to be returned back to you like a boomerang, then this would have to be the word function. That would have to be the word function. So there's another video lesson, several video lessons that talk about functions. Subs, you call upon them, and they do their job. Now, they can receive parameters, like this guy over here, this receives parameters, or they don't have to receive the parameters. It just depends on the kind of sub that you're creating. If they do receive parameters, there's a couple of ways that they can receive parameters. They're either receiving parameters by val or by ref. By val just simply means you've given me a copy in order to be able to, for me to do my job. If it's by ref, you've given me the original. Maybe, let's say for example that I have a birth certificate, right? And so I need the original birth certificate. All right, so I would do by ref. Okay, I just need a copy of the birth certificate. Okay, let me make a photocopy and give it to you. That would be an example of by val. Okay? And that is it. So I hope that this video lesson was helpful. This is Professor Robert Lee, so I hope you have a good day. See you next time.